The alien market was loud, crowded, and full of strange smells. Bright stalls lined both sides of the wide stone street, selling things from every corner of the galaxy. Tall alien traders shouted prices, waved colorful fabrics, and held up strange, glowing fruits to catch the eyes of buyers. Machines hummed. Small animals in cages made sharp noises, and the air was thick with smoke from cooking fires. Lyra moved slowly through the crowd, holding a small leather pouch close to her chest. She kept her head down, trying not to draw attention. Her clothes were thin and worn, her shoes falling apart. Every step made her tired. But she kept walking because this was her last chance. Inside the pouch was all she had left in the world: 3 small coins and a pendant carved from pale green stone. It was her mother's pendant, the only thing she had after her parents were gone. She had held it close every night for years. But today she had decided to sell it. She needed food more than memories. If she could sell it, maybe she could buy enough to survive another week. She stopped in front of a stall run by a thick, red-skinned alien with 4 arms. He was selling trinkets, old tools, and pieces of jewelry. Lyra opened her hand and showed the pendant. Her voice was quiet when she asked, "Will you buy this?" The merchant took it, turning it in his hands. Then he laughed loudly, a cruel sound that made nearby customers look over. "This? Worthless," he said, tossing it onto the table like it was trash. A few other merchants nearby laughed too, shaking their heads. "You think anyone will pay for a rock like this?" One of them said. Lyra felt her cheeks burn, but she swallowed her pride. She asked again, this time softer, "Please. I just need something for it." Before the merchant could answer, a tall yellow alien with sharp teeth stepped forward. He snatched the pendant from the table and tossed it to another alien. They passed it between them, laughing while Lyra tried to grab it back. Her pouch slipped from her hand in the struggle and fell to the ground. One of them kicked it away and bent down to take the coins inside. By the time she picked up the empty pouch, her pendant and money were both gone. She stood, frozen in the middle of the market, the crowd flowing around her like she wasn't there. No one stopped. No one asked if she was all right. Her hands shook, and she felt like the noise of the market was pressing in on her from all sides. She had nothing. Now, not the pendant, not the coins, nothing. Her throat hurt as she swallowed hard, trying not to cry. Then a shadow fell over her. She looked up and saw a human man standing there. He was taller than most around him, wearing dusty boots and a long coat. His dark hair was messy, and his face looked tired, but his eyes were steady. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, then at the merchants who were still laughing. A few stalls away, something about his expression made them stop laughing and look away. It wasn't anger exactly, it was the kind of quiet that came before something dangerous. The man stepped closer and asked, "What happened?" His voice was calm, but carried weight. Lyra didn't answer right away. She wanted to tell him, but her shame was heavy. Strangers never helped for free, usually. They only helped if they wanted something in return. Finally, she whispered, "They took everything." The human's jaw tightened, and he glanced toward the thieves. But he didn't move to chase them. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few metal credits. They gleamed in the sunlight, more than enough to buy food. He didn't hand them to her, though. Instead, he said, "Come with me." Lyra froze. She didn't know him, and following a stranger was dangerous. But what choice did she have? She could stay here, hungry and empty-handed, or take a chance. The human turned and started walking toward the edge of the market without looking back. After a moment, Lyra followed, keeping a few steps behind. They passed bright stalls full of goods she could never afford. The shouts of merchants faded as they reached a quieter corner of the market. There, leaning against a wall, was the same red-skinned merchant from before. The pale green pendant lay on a tray beside him. Unsold, without a word, The human stepped forward and picked it up. The merchant opened his mouth to protest, but the human tossed a credit onto the table far more than it was worth. The merchant snatched the coin and looked away. The human handed the pendant to Lyra. She stared at it in her hands, her voice trembling. Why? The man only said, because they don't get to take everything from you. The market noise swelled again in the distance, but here in this quiet corner, it felt like the world had slowed down. For the first time that day, Lyra felt like she could breathe. She didn't know who this human was, or why he had helped her, but something told her this was only the beginning. Lyra held the pendant tightly, afraid that if she loosened her grip, it might vanish again. The human man started walking away from the market's main street, and she followed in silence. She didn't know his name, didn't know his reason, but there was something in the way he moved, calm, steady, like he had been through far worse places than this. The narrow path between stalls grew quieter. The shouting of merchants replaced by the low hum of generators and the faint buzz of neon signs. The air smelled of metal and dust instead of spices and smoke. Finally, they stopped near a small food stall tucked into the corner of an alley. Steam rose from pots, carrying the scent of broth and herbs. The man spoke briefly to the vendor, handing over a few credits. Moments later, 2 steaming bowls of soup were placed on the counter. He took one and set the other in front of her. "Eat," he said simply. Lyra hesitated. It had been 2 days since she'd eaten anything more than scraps. Her hands were shaking as she lifted the bowl. The first sip burned her tongue. But she didn't care. The warmth spread through her chest, and for a moment she forgot the chaos of the market. When she looked up, the human was watching her. "What's your name?" he asked Lyra. She replied softly. He nodded. "Kane." They sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the clinking of spoons and the hiss of steam from the pots. Lyra wanted to thank him, but the words felt small compared to what he had done. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you help me?" Kane didn't answer right away. He took another sip, his eyes scanning the alley as if he expected trouble, because no one else would, he said at last. Before Lyra could say anything, heavy footsteps echoed down the alley. 3 tall aliens approached, their skin mottled with dark patterns, eyes narrow and sharp. Lyra's stomach tightened. She recognized them from earlier. The leader's voice was low, but mocking. "You're new here, human. You don't know how this place works." Kane didn't move from his seat. "I'm listening," the leader smirked. "That girl belongs to us. Street strays don't get to eat unless we say so." Lyra's hands clenched around her bowl, fear rushing back into her chest. Kane's tone didn't change. "You're mistaken. She's not yours." The leader stepped closer, towering over the table. "Walk away, human, before you regret it." Kane looked up at him, calm as ever. "No." For a moment, no one moved. The other 2 aliens shifted uneasily, glancing at Kane's coat, as if they suspected what might be hidden beneath it. Finally, the leader laughed without humor. "Enjoy your meal, stranger. It might be your last here." With that, they turned and walked away. Disappearing into the crowd at the edge of the alley, Lyra let out a shaky breath. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They'll come back." Kane set his spoon down. "Then I'll be ready." They finished eating in silence. When they stepped back onto the main road, the market was starting to close. Lanterns were being lit, casting a warm glow over the stalls. The crowd was thinner now, but the air still carried the buzz of trade and bargaining. Kane led her past rows of vendors toward a quieter section where the stalls looked older. Their signs faded. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked. Kane glanced at her. "You need supplies." They stopped at a small shop run by an elderly alien whose hands trembled as he arranged his goods. Kane bought a small cloth bag, a water skin, and a packet of preserved food. Lyra tried to protest. "I can't pay you back. I didn't ask for payment." Kane said, handing her the bag. She took it slowly. Unsure how to carry this sudden kindness. It felt heavy, not because of the items inside, but because no one had ever given her anything without wanting something in return. As they walked toward the far side of the market, Lyra noticed they were. Leaving the busy streets entirely, the stone roads gave way to packed dirt, and the noise of the crowd faded into the distance. It was darker here, the only light coming from small flickering lamps. Old buildings leaned close together, and the air smelled damp. Kane seemed to know exactly where he was going. Lyra quickened her steps to keep up. "Where are you taking me?" "To get your pendant back," he said. Her heart skipped. She thought it was gone forever, but his voice left no room for doubt. They turned a corner, and there he was, the red-skinned merchant, sitting alone behind his stall. The pale green pendant lay on a cloth beside him. Kane walked up without hesitation, picked it up, and dropped a credit on the table. The merchant opened his mouth to argue, but when he saw Kane's expression, he shut it again and took the coin. Kane turned and handed the pendant to Lyra. Her fingers closed around it tightly, her voice trembling. I don't understand why." Kane met her eyes. "'Cause they don't get to take everything from you." Lyra didn't know what to say. The pendant felt warm in her hand, like it had been waiting to return to her for the first time in years. She felt a tiny spark of hope, and though she didn't realize it yet, her life had just changed forever. The night air was cooler now, carrying the faint smell of the sea from somewhere beyond the city walls. Kane and Lyra walked slowly, the dim light from the street lamps stretching their shadows across the road. Lyra kept glancing at the pendant in her hand, as if afraid it might vanish if she looked away. Kane walked ahead, his coat swaying slightly with each step, his boots making a steady sound against the ground. They passed a small plaza where a few stalls were still open. Selling roasted meat on skewers, Kane stopped and bought two, handing one to Lyra. Without a word, she took it carefully, the warmth sinking into her cold fingers. They sat on the edge of a low stone wall, eating in silence for a while. Finally, Lyra spoke. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't even know me." Kane looked at her for a moment, then said, "I know enough." It wasn't the answer she expected, but there was something in his voice that told her not to push further. She told him a little about herself, her voice low as if afraid someone might hear. Her parents had died years ago in an accident, and she had been on her own since. She had learned to survive by scavenging, trading scraps, and avoiding trouble when she could. But in this market, trouble always seemed to find her. Kane listened without interrupting, his eyes steady on hers. When she finished, he nodded once, as if filing the information away. The sound of heavy boots broke the moment. Lyra turned and froze. 3 large aliens were walking toward them from across the plaza. She recognized them instantly, the same ones who had threatened Kane earlier, their leader. A thick-shouldered alien with dark gray skin stopped a few steps away. He grinned, showing a row of sharp teeth. "Still here, human." Kane didn't stand, but his hand rested casually on his knee. Wasn't planning on leaving, he said, his tone calm. The leader's grin faded. "You're making a mistake. This isn't your world. You don't get to break our rules." One of the others stepped forward, his voice harsh. "Hand over the girl and her trinket, and we'll forget this happened." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at Kane, waiting for him to tell her to run. But he didn't move, didn't even blink. Instead, his voice dropped to a quieter, sharper tone. "No." The air seemed to grow heavier, the noise from the nearby stalls fading as the tension settled between them. The leader narrowed his eyes. "You think you can protect her? She's nothing, and you're just another outsider." Kane stood now, not rushing, but in a way that made all 3 aliens take a small step back. "Go," he said simply. The leader's eyes flickered with something anger, but also caution. He glanced at the weapon-shaped bulge under Kane's coat. Finally, he spat on the ground and growled. "This isn't over." They turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows at the far end of the plaza. Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were still shaking. "They'll come back," she whispered. Kane nodded. Probably. He sat back down, as if the threat hadn't just happened. "Eat. You'll need your strength," he said. They finished the skewers and started walking again, heading toward the quieter side of the city. The streets here were narrower, the buildings leaning over them like silent watchers. A few windows glowed faintly, but most of the area was dark. Lyra stayed close to Kane. Feeling safer than she wanted to admit, he walked with the same steady pace, his eyes always scanning their surroundings. After a while, they stopped near a small courtyard where a fountain trickled softly in the center. Kane sat on the low edge of the fountain, motioning for Lyra to sit too. "You need to understand something," he said, his tone serious now. "This place isn't safe. The people who run that market, those thugs, they don't let go of anything they think belongs to them." Lyra nodded slowly. "I know. Then you also know they'll come for you again." Kane continued. Her voice was small. "I've been running from them for years." Kane leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "You have two choices. You can keep running, or you can stop." Lyra frowned. "Stop? How?" Kane's eyes met hers. "By making sure they can't touch you again." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She didn't fully understand what he intended, but the calm certainty in his voice made her believe him for the first time. In a long time, Lyra felt something she hadn't dared to feel: hope mixed with fear. Kane stood and looked toward the dark streets ahead. "Come on, we're not staying in the open." She followed without question, gripping her pendant tightly. Somewhere deep down, she knew the warning was real, and that whatever happened next, her life would never be the same. The streets grew quieter the farther Kane and Lyra walked. The glow of the market faded behind them until only scattered lamps lit the way. Shadows stretched long over the cracked stone road, and the sound of their footsteps seemed too loud in the stillness. Lyra kept glancing over her shoulder, but the streets were empty. Even so, a knot of unease twisted in her stomach. Kane walked with the same steady pace, but his eyes moved constantly, checking the alleys and rooftops. He seemed calm, yet ready for anything. The air smelled faintly of oil and wet stone, and somewhere in the distance, a metal gate creaked in the wind. "This way," Kane said quietly, turning down a narrow lane between two leaning buildings. The lane was so tight they could touch both walls if they stretched out their arms. Lyra stayed close behind him, clutching her pendant. She didn't know where he was taking her, but she trusted his steps more than her own. Halfway down the lane, Kane slowed, tilting his head slightly. Lyra opened her mouth to ask what was wrong. Then she heard it too. Footsteps, multiple sets, heavy and deliberate, echoing off the walls. Kane didn't stop walking, but his voice dropped low. "Stay behind me." They reached the end of the lane and stepped into a wider street. That's when the figures emerged from the shadows. 3 from the left, 2 from the right, Lyra recognized them instantly, the same thugs from before, joined by 2 more she didn't know. The leader grinned, his sharp teeth catching the dim light. "Told you this wasn't over, human," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Kane stepped slightly forward, putting himself between Lyra and the thugs. "You should have stayed away," he replied, calm but cold. The leader laughed. "You think you can protect her from all of us?" One of the newcomers stepped closer, a long metal pipe in his hands. "She's ours. Give her to us, and maybe we won't break you." Lyra's heart pounded so hard it hurt. She wanted to run, but the alley behind them was a dead end. There was nowhere to go. Kane didn't move, didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his coat slowly. The leader's eyes narrowed. Careful, human. Kane pulled out a strange weapon sleek, black, and humming faintly with a low-energy pulse. It didn't look like any gun Lyra had seen before. He held it loosely at his side, but the way his fingers rested on the grip made it clear he knew exactly how to use it. The leader hesitated for a moment, then snarled, "Get him." The thugs rushed forward. Kane moved fast. Stepping to the side and raising his weapon, a bright arc of energy flashed, striking the first attacker and sending him crashing into the wall. The smell of scorched fabric filled the air. Another swung the metal pipe at Kane's head. But Kane ducked, driving his elbow into the thug's ribs. The man gasped and stumbled back. The leader lunged next, his claws aiming for Kane's shoulder. Kane twisted away, grabbing the leader's arm and shoving him hard into one of his own. Men, the two crashed to the ground in a heap. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her eyes wide. The fight was brutal, but controlled Kane's movements sharp. Efficient, he didn't waste energy. Every strike putting someone down or forcing them back. One thug tried to grab Lyra, but Kane was there in an instant. Yanking him away and slamming him against the wall with a single motion, the man crumpled, groaning within moments. The 5 attackers were either on the ground or retreating into the shadows. The leader glared at Kane, holding his side where the energy weapon had grazed him. "This isn't finished," he spat before limping away. The others followed, their footsteps fading into the night for a long moment. The street was silent, except for Lyra's quick breathing. Kane lowered his weapon and slipped it back into his coat. He turned to her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head quickly, though. Her hands were still trembling. You fought them all," she said, her voice almost disbelieving. Kane shrugged. "They've seen worse." They started walking again, this time more quickly. Lyra stayed even closer to him, her eyes scanning the shadows. Her heart was still racing, but there was a strange comfort in knowing Kane had stood between her and danger without hesitation. She had never known anyone who would do that for her. The streets grew quieter as they neared the edge of the city. Ahead, Lyra saw the faint glow of dock lights. The smell of oil and salt water growing stronger. Kane led her toward a row of small ships tied to the piers. Most were cargo haulers, old and patched, their hulls stained with rust, but at the far end was a sleeker craft, dark gray with smooth lines. Kane stopped near it, looking back at her. "You can stay here for the night," he said. Motioning toward the ship, Lyra hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" "You don't even know me." Kane looked at her for a long moment before replying. "I don't need to." The hum of the market was far away now, replaced by the gentle creak of ropes and the lapping of water against the docks, somewhere deep. Inside, Lyra knew that the trouble wasn't over. Those thugs would come again. Maybe with more people, but for now, she followed Kane toward the ship, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. The ship loomed in the dim dock light, its hull a smooth, dark gray that seemed to swallow the glow around it. Lyra stepped carefully onto the metal ramp, the sound of her footsteps echoing softly. Kane followed behind, moving with the same steady pace he had kept all night. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil, metal, and something clean like filtered air from a machine that worked perfectly. The ship's interior was narrow but organized, every tool and object in its place. Kane pointed toward a small side room. "You can rest here for now." The room was tiny, with a narrow bed, a folded blanket, and a storage box in the corner. Lyra stood in the doorway, unsure if she should step inside. "It's fine," Kane said. Reading her hesitation, "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt strange to her. She stepped in, setting her cloth bag on the bed, still clutching the pendant in her other hand. But even with Kane's calm voice, she couldn't shake the memory of the thugs' faces. They had promised it wasn't over, and she knew they meant it. A faint creak came from somewhere outside. The ship, Lyra, froze, her heart jumping. Kane's head turned instantly, his body tensing like a coiled spring. "Stay here," he said quietly, before stepping out of the room. She moved to the door and peered out. Kane was already at the ship's main hatch, opening it slowly. The night air drifted in, bringing the faint smell of salt water and something else, sweat and leather. Figures moved in the shadows near the dock. It was them. The thugs had returned. And this time they weren't alone. 7 of them emerged from the dark, led by the gray-skinned leader. His grin was wide, full of cruel satisfaction, thought. "You could hide, human," he called out, his voice loud enough to carry across the dock. Kane stepped down the ramp slowly, his coat shifting just enough to reveal the edge of his weapon. "You should have stayed away," Kane said evenly. The leader laughed and let you walk off with what's ours. "No, we're ending this here." 2 of the thugs moved toward the ramp, while the others spread out, blocking the street behind the dock. Lyra's grip on the doorframe tightened. Kane glanced back toward her, his eyes sharp. "Lock the door," he said, but she didn't move, something in her chest refusing to hide while he faced them alone. The leader made the first move, rushing forward with a long curved blade. Kane sidestepped smoothly, his weapon flashing in the dock light. An arc of blue energy struck the leader's arm, forcing him back with a shout before the others could react. Kane was already moving. He kicked one thug in the knee, sending him crashing down, then spun to block a pipe swing aimed at his head. The fight was fast and violent. 2 attackers came at him at once, one swinging high, the other low. Kane ducked under the first blow and drove his shoulder into the second thug's chest, slamming him into a stack of crates. A third came from behind, but Kane turned just in time, his elbows smashing into the side of the man's head. The dull crack made Lyra flinch. The leader roared and charged again, this time joined by 2 more. Kane blocked one strike with his weapon, twisting to avoid another. The blue energy blade hummed as it cut through the air, forcing the attackers to step back. But there were too many, and they were circling now, trying to pin him between them. Lyra's eyes darted to the dock around them. Her heart pounded. But she spotted something, a loose rope hanging from a pulley above a stack of cargo. She moved before she could think, slipping out of the ship and running toward it. Her fingers closed around the rope, and she pulled hard. The pulley squealed, and the heavy cargo shifted, toppling over. 2 of the thugs shouted in surprise as crates crashed down beside them, forcing them to stumble away from Kane. Kane seized the opening, striking hard. One thug dropped to the ground unconscious. Another limped back, holding his side. The leader glared at Lyra, his teeth bared. "You?" he started, but Kane was on him in an instant. The energy blade stopped just short of the leader's throat, humming dangerously. "Leave," Kane said, his voice low but lethal. The leader's eyes flicked between Kane and the ship. Then he spat on the dock. "This isn't the end," he growled before signaling the others to retreat. They melted back into the shadows, their footsteps fading into the night. Kane stood still for a moment, his breathing calm despite the fight. Then he turned to Lyra, his eyes narrowing. "I told you to stay inside." She swallowed hard. "I couldn't just stand there." A long pause. Then he shook his head. "You're lucky they didn't get to you." They walked back up the ramp, Kane closing and locking the hatch behind them. The ship felt smaller now, the hum of its systems louder in the silence. Lyra sat on the small bed in her room, her hands still shaking. She had seen people fight before, but never like that. Kane fought like someone who had survived wars. She looked at him, wanting to ask who he really was, but the words wouldn't come. Kane checked his weapon, the faint blue light fading as he powered it down. "They won't stop," he said finally, his voice quiet. Not unless we make them. Lyra wasn't sure what he meant, but she had a feeling that whatever came next, it would be even more dangerous, and for some reason, she wasn't as afraid as she thought she should be. The ship was quiet after the fight, but the silence felt heavy. Lyra sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her hands gripping the folded blanket in her lap. Outside, she could still hear the distant creak of the docks and the soft slap of water. Against the pilings, every time she closed her eyes, she saw the thugs' faces twisted with anger. And every time she opened them, she saw Kane standing alone against all of them, moving like he had done this 100 times before. Kane was in the main room, checking the ship's systems. His movements were quick and precise, his eyes scanning the control panels as if every flicker of a light told him a story. Lyra stepped out quietly, not wanting to disturb him. Still, he glanced up. As if he had sensed her the moment she entered the room. "You should get some rest," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I can't sleep," she admitted, her voice low. Kane nodded slightly, not pressing the matter. Instead, he walked over to a storage locker and pulled out a small bundle. He unwrapped it to reveal a clean shirt, sturdy trousers, and a pair of boots. "Here," he said, handing them to her. "You'll need these." Lyra stared at the clothes, unsure how to respond. I don't have anything to give you in return," she said softly. Kane's gaze was steady. "I didn't ask for anything." Her fingers tightened around the fabric. "But I owe you for the pendant, for the food. For tonight, you." "Don't owe me," Kane interrupted, his voice firm. "Not for any of it." The words felt strange in her ears. No one had ever helped her without expecting something back. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or uneasy. She looked down. "Then why are you helping me?" Kane was silent for a moment, then said, "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing." He turned away, checking the status display on the wall. But his words stayed with her. Maybe he understood her life more than she thought. Maybe he had been where she was now, after a while. Kane told her to change into the clothes. They were a little loose, but far warmer and sturdier than anything she had worn in years. The boots felt solid under her feet, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could walk without pain when she stepped back into the main room. Kane gave a brief nod. "They fit," he said simply. They shared a simple meal from the ship's supplies: bread, dried fruit, and a small tin of spiced meat. Lyra ate slowly, still thinking about his words. When they were done, Kane leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "They'll come again," he said quietly, "and next time, they'll bring more than a few thugs." Lyra swallowed. "Then, what do we do?" Kane's eyes met hers. "We don't wait for them to come to us." The idea made her chest tighten. "You mean? Go after them?" she asked. Kane didn't answer directly, but the look in his eyes told her enough. "They think you're alone. They think you're easy prey. That's why they keep coming," he said. Lyra's voice was small. "And I'm not." Kane's expression softened. "Not anymore." The words hit her harder than she expected. For so long, she had been on her own. Hearing someone say she wasn't alone anymore made something deep inside her ache. "I still can't repay you," she murmured. Kane shook his head. "I told you, you don't have to. Later." As the ship hummed softly in the dark, Lyra lay on the narrow bed. Her mind kept replaying the fight. The moment Kane had stood between her and danger without hesitation. She thought about running before the trouble got worse, but then she thought about the pendant in her hand and about how Kane had bought it back for her when no one else cared. She realized that leaving now would feel like betraying something, not because she owed him, but because he had given her something far more important than food or clothes. He had given her dignity back. For the first time in years, she felt like a person instead of a shadow slipping through the streets. She sat up, looking toward the closed door. The decision came quietly but firmly. If Kane was going to face those people again, she wouldn't run. She might not know how to fight like him, But she could help in other ways. She could watch, learn, and stand beside him when it mattered. In the control room, Kane sat alone, his eyes on the flickering map of the city. He traced a path with his finger toward the market district. He knew the risk of going back. But he also knew that leaving things unfinished would only invite more trouble. His jaw tightened. This wasn't just about Lyra anymore. It was about sending a message. Lyra didn't know yet, but by staying on his ship tonight, she had already chosen her path, and by morning, the two of them would be heading straight into the heart of the danger they had been trying to escape. The first light of dawn crept over the city, turning the sky pale gold. The market district was still quiet, the stalls closed, the streets empty except for a few workers sweeping dust from the cobblestones. Kane stood at the edge of the street, his coat drawn tight against the morning chill. Beside him, Lyra walked with steady steps, her pendant resting against her chest. She had not asked where they were going. She already knew. They moved through the narrow alleys, taking a path that avoided the main roads, the smell of last night's smoke still hung in the air, mixed with a damp scent of stone and early rain. Finally, they reached the heart of the market. The red-skinned merchant's stall stood at the center, and behind him, leaning on a wall, was the gray-skinned leader. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw Kane and Lyra walking straight toward him. Kane didn't slow. The leader straightened. Forcing a smirk, "You've got nerve coming back here, human." Kane's voice was calm. "I told you before she's not yours." A few other merchants began to gather. Drawn by the tension in the air, whispers spread quickly. The sound of quiet speculation mixing with the creak of awnings above. The leader stepped forward, his broad shoulders blocking the path. "You want to make this official? Fine, but once this starts, there's no walking away." Kane's gaze didn't waver. Good. From the corner of her eye, Lyra saw more of the leader's men appear. Slipping from between stalls, 7 of them again, their eyes fixed on Kane. The leader raised a hand, ready to give the signal to attack, but Kane moved first. His weapon was in his hand in a single motion. The blue energy blade humming to life. The sudden glow made the closest thugs hesitate. Kane stepped forward, each strike precise, pushing the leader's men back before they could surround him. Lyra stayed close to the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding. She spotted the red-skinned merchant slipping behind a stall with something in his hands, a short, curved blade. Without thinking, she darted forward, grabbing a hanging rope from a stall frame. She yanked hard and a heavy canvas awning collapsed, knocking the merchant off balance and sending the blade clattering to the ground. The market erupted into chaos. Kane's movements were fast and controlled, each swing of his weapon forcing the thugs to retreat. The leader roared and charged. Claws outstretched, Kane sidestepped, twisting the leader's arm and shoving him into the nearest stall. The wooden frame splintered, spilling baskets of goods across the street. 2 of the thugs tried to grab Lyra, but she ducked and slipped behind a crate. Kane was there a second later, driving them back with quick strikes. The leader struggled to stand, his breathing heavy. "You think you've won?" he snarled. Kane's voice was steady. "No, I'm ending it," with a final push. Kane knocked the leader's weapon from his hands. The blue blade stopped inches from his throat. The market had gone silent now, the merchants and bystanders watching every movement. Kane spoke loud enough for all to hear. "This ends today. She walks free. You will never touch her again." The leader's jaw clenched, but the fear in his eyes was clear. Finally, he gave a short, bitter nod. Kane stepped back. Lowering his weapon, the leader staggered away, motioning for his men to follow, one by one. They slipped into the shadows, leaving the market strangely quiet. Lyra stood frozen for a moment, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths. Then, she stepped toward Kane, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's over." Kane nodded once, for now. but there was something in his tone that told her he didn't believe it was truly the end. Still, the change was immediate. The merchants who had ignored her before now kept their distance. Some even looked away. When she passed, as if afraid to be caught in Kane's gaze for the first time in years. She walks through the market without feeling invisible or small. They left the district together, taking the long road toward the docks. The morning sun was higher now, warming the stones beneath their feet. When they reached the ship, Kane paused. "At the base of the ramp, you can stay here as long as you want," he said. Lyra's throat tightened. "I want to stay." He gave a short nod, as if he had already expected her answer. Inside, the ship hummed softly. The air cool and clean. Lyra sat in the small chair by the viewport. Watching the water ripple in the harbor, her pendant rested. In her hand, warm from the sun. She thought about the last 2 days, how she had lost everything, and then, somehow, gained more than she could have imagined. Kane moved around the control room, checking readouts and flipping switches. Finally, he looked at her and said, "We're leaving this place." "Where?" She asked. "Anywhere else?" he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. The ramp rose. Sealing the ship from the outside world, engines rumbled beneath their feet, the docks shrinking in the viewport. The city faded behind them, the endless sky stretching out ahead for the first time in her life. Lyra wasn't thinking about surviving the day. She was thinking about what came next. She turned to Kane. "Thank you." He didn't look at her, but there was warmth in his voice when he said, "Welcome aboard." The stars began to appear beyond the clouds, and the ship slipped toward them, whatever waited in the galaxy ahead. They would face it together, and for Lyra, the journey was only beginning.